In the small, peaceful town of Willow Creek, life moved at a gentle pace. The air smelled of fresh hay and wildflowers, and the sound of birds chirping filled the mornings. Nestled among rolling hills and vibrant pastures was Daniel Harper's farm, a piece of land that had been in his family for generations. It wasn't just a farm, it was a legacy passed down from his great-grandparents. Every inch of the soil told stories of hard work, love, and resilience. For Daniel, farming wasn't just a job, it was his purpose. Daniel grew organic vegetables, tended to chickens, and nurtured fruit trees that bore the sweetest apples in the county. His irrigation system relied on a natural spring that flowed through the property, providing clean water year-round. This spring was the heart of the farm, keeping everything alive even during dry spells. Neighbors often stopped by to admire his lush fields and share friendly conversations over homemade lemonade. Everyone loved Daniel. He was kind, humble, and always willing to lend a helping hand. But things started changing when developers built a new gated community nearby. They called it Willow Heights, a fancy name for rows of identical houses with manicured lawns and shiny cars parked outside. At first, Daniel thought nothing of it. After all, progress happens everywhere, right? But soon, tensions began brewing. The Homeowners Association, HOA of Willow Heights, appointed one of its members, Karen Whitmore, as their unofficial leader. She quickly earned a reputation as someone who took her role way too seriously. Karen was known throughout the neighborhood as the rule enforcer. If someone left their trash cans out overnight or painted their front door an unapproved shade of blue, Karen would march right up to them with a clipboard and a list of complaints. Her sharp tongue and knack for finding fault made her both feared and disliked. Some people joked that she probably dreamed about issuing fines. Despite her quirks, most residents tolerated her because they assumed she only cared about trivial matters like mailbox colors and lawn lengths. Little did they know Karen had bigger plans, and Daniel's farm stood directly in her path. What made Karen so determined? Well, she saw herself as more than just another homeowner. To her, being part of the HOA board meant wielding power. And power in Karen's mind meant control, over rules, over people, and especially over resources. When the drought hit Willow Creek that summer, drying up wells across the region, Karen spotted an opportunity. While others struggled to find water, Daniel's farm remained green and thriving, thanks to the spring running through his property. That sight infuriated her. How dare he have access to something so precious while her community suffered? One afternoon, Karen decided to pay Daniel a visit. Clutching a stack of papers and wearing her signature scowl, she marched onto his farm without invitation. Daniel was knee-deep in mud, fixing a broken fence post, when he noticed her approaching. He wiped his hands on his jeans and greeted her politely, though he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his gut. Karen didn't waste time with pleasantries. Instead, she launched into a lecture about how the spring belonged to everyone, not just him, and demanded he stop using it immediately. Daniel listened patiently but firmly explained that the spring had been part of his family's land for over 100 years. He showed her old maps and deeds proving his claim. But Karen wasn't interested in facts. She waved her papers around, insisting they gave her authority to regulate the water supply. When Daniel refused to back down, she threatened legal action. "You'll regret this," she snapped before storming off. That encounter marked the beginning of a nightmare for Daniel. What started as a simple disagreement turned into a full-blown battle, one that would test his patience, challenge his principles, and force him to fight for what he held dear. As days passed, Daniel couldn't help but wonder, why was Karen so obsessed with controlling his farm? Was it really about water, or was there something else driving her relentless pursuit? Whatever the reason, one thing was clear. Life in Willow Creek would never be the same again. The drought in Willow Creek worsened as the weeks went by, turning once verdant fields into parched stretches of cracked earth. Rivers dwindled to trickles, and wells ran dry, leaving many residents struggling to secure even the most basic necessities. Yet amidst this growing crisis, Daniel Harper's farm stood out like an oasis. Thanks to the natural spring that flowed through his property, his crops flourished, his animals stayed hydrated, and his land remained green and alive. To the casual observer, it seemed almost miraculous, a testament to both nature's generosity and Daniel's careful stewardship. But not everyone saw it that way. Karen Whitmore, ever vigilant and always calculating, viewed Daniel's thriving farm with mounting frustration. While her neighbors in Willow Heights rationed water for their lawns and argued over who got to fill their pools last, Daniel appeared, untouched by the chaos. Every time she drove past his property, her irritation grew. How could one man have so much when others had so little? The thought gnawed at her until it became an obsession. In her mind, fairness demanded equal distribution, and if Daniel wouldn't share willingly, then she would take matters into her own hands. Karen began attending HOA meetings armed with charts, graphs, and what she claimed were legal documents, proving that the spring on Daniel's farm was a communal resource. She waved these papers dramatically during discussions, pointing out phrases like shared water rights and historical claims. Of course, no one bothered to verify her sources. They trusted her because she spoke with such conviction. With each meeting, her arguments gained traction. Soon, whispers spread among the homeowners about how Daniel was hoarding water during a time of scarcity. Some even accused him of being selfish, though none of them had ever spoken directly to him about it. Encouraged by the growing support, Karen decided to escalate things. She drafted a formal letter demanding that Daniel cease using the spring water exclusively for his farm. Delivered via certified mail, the letter arrived on a Tuesday morning while Daniel was tending to his tomatoes. He opened it curiously, expecting perhaps a friendly inquiry or request from a neighbor. Instead, he found himself staring at page after page of legalese and thinly veiled threats. The gist was clear. Stop using the spring or face consequences. Daniel sighed heavily as he set the letter down. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to lay claim to his family's spring, but it was certainly the most aggressive attempt. Yet, he knew deep down that Karen's accusations were baseless. His ancestors had purchased the land, including the spring, over a century ago. Still, fighting back wouldn't be easy. Lawsuits were expensive, and proving ownership required digging up old records and hiring lawyers. For now, he chose to ignore the letter, hoping it was just a bluff meant to intimidate him. Unfortunately, Karen wasn't bluffing. When her demands went unanswered, she doubled down, rallying the HOA board to file a lawsuit against Daniel. They alleged that he was illegally monopolizing the water supply, depriving others of their rightful share. Their case hinged on vague interpretations of water rights laws and the falsified documents Karen had presented earlier. To make matters worse, they hired a high-powered attorney who specialized in property disputes, ensuring their side looked as legitimate as possible. For Daniel, the news hit hard. He had always prided himself on being a peaceful man, someone who avoided conflict whenever possible. But this felt different. It wasn't just about him anymore. If he gave in, it would set a dangerous precedent, allowing anyone with enough money and influence to swoop in and take what didn't belong to them. More than that, losing the spring would mean losing the very essence of his farm. Without it, his crops would fail, his animals would suffer, and generations of hard work would crumble. As the days turned into weeks, Daniel found himself increasingly isolated. Neighbors who once smiled and waved now crossed the street to avoid eye contact. Some even muttered under their breath about how unfair it was that he had access to water while they struggled. Few dared to speak up in his defense, fearing retaliation from Karen and her allies. Even local businesses started treating him differently, refusing to sell him supplies or offer services. It was as if an invisible wall had been erected around him, separating him from the community he loved. Despite the mounting pressure, Daniel refused to give up. He spent hours poring over old deeds, maps, and photographs, searching for anything that could prove his ownership of the spring. His late-night research sessions often left him exhausted, but he pressed on, driven by a sense of duty to protect his family's legacy. Occasionally, he'd reach out to friends and acquaintances for advice, hoping someone might know a lawyer willing to take on his case pro bono. Most were sympathetic but hesitant to get involved, citing the risks of crossing Karen and her powerful connections. One evening, as Daniel sat alone in his kitchen with stacks of papers spread across the table, he realized something important. This fight wasn't just about him. It was about standing up to greed and entitlement, about reminding people that some things, like clean water and ancestral land, shouldn't be commodified or exploited. He thought about his grandparents who had worked tirelessly to build the farm from scratch, and his parents, who had taught him the value of perseverance. Giving up wasn't an option. Not now, not ever. Meanwhile, Karen continued her campaign with relentless energy. She organized town hall meetings where she railed against Daniel, painting him as a villain who cared more about profit than people. She distributed flyers accusing him of wasting water while others suffered. She even convinced a few local reporters to write stories casting doubt on his intentions. Each move was calculated to sway public opinion further in her favor, isolating Daniel and weakening his resolve. Yet despite all her efforts, there was one thing Karen hadn't accounted for: the truth. Buried beneath layers of history and bureaucracy was undeniable evidence that the spring belonged to Daniel's family. And somewhere, somehow, Daniel knew he'd find it. Until then, he vowed to hold his ground, no matter how daunting the challenge ahead. After all, sometimes the hardest battles are the ones worth fighting, for justice, for integrity, and for the future of those who come after us. As the legal battle dragged on, Karen Whitmore grew increasingly impatient. To her, waiting for courts and lawyers to sort things out felt like a waste of time. She was a woman of action, someone who believed in taking matters into her own hands, no matter the cost. Her frustration reached its peak one sunny Saturday morning when she decided that enough was enough. If Daniel Harper wasn't going to give up the spring willingly, then she would simply take it herself. That day, Daniel woke up early as usual, ready to start his chores. The air was crisp, and dew still clung to the blades of grass. As he stepped, outside, coffee mug in hand, he noticed something unusual near the edge of his property where the spring bubbled up from the ground. At first glance, it looked like a group of people moving around busily. Squinting against the morning light, he realized with growing alarm that they were installing pipes, large, industrial-grade ones designed to divert water. Heart-pounding, Daniel grabbed his boots and hurried over to investigate. What he saw made his blood boil. Several men in work uniforms were digging trenches and laying down sections of pipe that snaked away from the spring toward Willow Heights. Standing nearby, clipboard in hand, was none other than Karen Whitmore. She wore an expression of smug satisfaction as if she'd already won. "Karen," Daniel shouted, his voice echoing across the field. "What do you think you're doing?" She turned to face him, her lips curling into a tight smile. "Oh, good morning, Daniel," she said sweetly, though there was nothing sweet about her tone. "We're just making sure everyone gets their fair share of water. You've had it all to yourself long enough." "This is my property," Daniel shot back, gesturing wildly at the scene unfolding before him. "You can't just barge in here and steal my water." Karen raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "Steal? Oh no, dear. This isn't theft. We have every right to access this resource. It's for the greater good, after all." She glanced at the workers, signaling them to continue their work. "Besides, we're not harming anything. You'll still have plenty left over." Daniel clenched his fists, struggling to keep his temper in check. He knew arguing with Karen wouldn't solve anything, not when she refused to listen to reason. Still, he couldn't stand idly by while they dismantled what generations of his family had built. "You're trespassing," he said firmly. "If you don't leave now, I'm calling the sheriff." Karen chuckled dismissively. "Go ahead. Call whoever you want. By the time anyone shows up, we'll be done here. And trust me, once the water starts flowing into Willow Heights, nobody will care about your little farm anymore." Her words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the audacity of her actions, it was the cold, calculated way she justified them. She truly believed she was in the right, convinced that her community's needs outweighed everything else, including the law. For Karen, it wasn't about fairness or justice. It was about control. And Daniel realized, standing there surrounded by chaos, that reasoning with her was impossible. Furious but determined, Daniel stormed back to his house to call the authorities. When the sheriff finally arrived, Karen greeted him with rehearsed explanations and the same stack of falsified documents she'd been waving around for weeks. To Daniel's dismay, the officer seemed hesitant to intervene, citing the complexity of water rights laws and suggesting they wait for the court's decision. Frustration boiled inside Daniel as he watched helplessly while the workers completed their task and disappeared into trucks bearing the logo of a private construction company. Over the next few days, the impact of Karen's actions became painfully clear. The flow of water from the spring diminished significantly, leaving Daniel's irrigation system struggling to function. His crops began wilting under the relentless sun, and his animals grew restless without sufficient water. The once thriving farm now teetered on the brink of collapse. Every hour felt like a race against time, and Daniel knew he couldn't afford to lose. Word of what happened spread quickly through Willow Creek. Some residents sympathized with Daniel, whispering about how unfair Karen's behavior was. Others, swayed by her propaganda, shrugged it off, saying that desperate times called for desperate measures. But behind closed doors, rumors began circulating about Karen's true motives. A few brave souls started asking questions. Why did she insist on diverting the water directly to Willow Heights instead of sharing it with the wider community? Was this really about helping people? Or was it about profit? It turned out that Karen had bigger plans than anyone suspected. Unbeknownst to most of her neighbors, she had quietly negotiated deals with several nearby towns willing to pay top dollar for excess water. With drought gripping the region, municipalities were desperate to secure reliable sources, and Karen saw an opportunity to cash in. By monopolizing the spring, she could sell its water at inflated prices, lining her pockets while portraying herself as a savior to her community. It was a scheme rooted in greed, masked by a veneer of altruism. Despite the mounting evidence of Karen's ulterior motives, Daniel struggled to fight back alone. He lacked the resources and connections needed to expose her lies publicly. That's when fate intervened in the form of Maria Alvarez, a retired lawyer who lived on the outskirts of town. Maria had spent decades practicing environmental law before retiring to Willow Creek to enjoy a quieter life. She had always admired Daniel's farm from afar and was appalled when she heard about Karen's antics. One afternoon, Maria showed up at Daniel's doorstep unannounced. "I hear you're having some trouble," she said with a warm smile, extending her hand. Daniel nodded grimly, inviting her inside. Over cups of strong coffee, he recounted everything that had happened. From Karen's initial demands to the illegal piping operation, Maria listened intently, her sharp eyes narrowing as he described the details. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. "This isn't just about water, is it?" she asked rhetorically. "It's about power, about someone thinking they're above the rules because they have money and influence." Daniel nodded again, feeling a mix of anger and hopelessness. "I don't know what to do," he admitted. "I've tried everything, but it feels like no one cares." Maria placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Don't give up yet. You're not alone in this. Let's gather evidence, build a case, and show everyone the truth. Together, we can hold her accountable." Inspired by Maria's determination, Daniel agreed to team up. They began working tirelessly, combing through old records, taking photographs of the damaged irrigation system, and documenting every interaction with Karen and her crew. Daniel also installed hidden cameras around the spring to capture footage of any further trespassing. Each discovery strengthened their resolve, fueling their belief that justice could prevail, even against someone as ruthless as Karen. Meanwhile, Karen remained oblivious to their efforts. Confident in her victory, she doubled down on her schemes, hosting lavish parties at her home to celebrate the newfound abundance of water in Willow Heights. She even gave interviews to local reporters, boasting about how she had saved her community from disaster. Her arrogance blinded her to the storm brewing on the horizon. For Daniel, the invasion of his property wasn't just a personal attack. It was a violation of everything he held sacred. The spring wasn't just water, it was life itself, sustaining not only his farm but also the ecosystem around it. Watching it drained away for selfish gain broke his heart. Yet even in his darkest moments, he found solace in knowing that he wasn't fighting alone anymore. With Maria by his side, and the truth on their side. He dared to hope that the tide might finally turn, and that justice would come for those who thought they were untouchable. Daniel Harper's quiet life had been turned upside down, but with Maria Alvarez by his side, he began to feel a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they formed an unlikely alliance that would become the backbone of Daniel's fight against Karen Whitmore and her relentless campaign to control the spring. Maria wasn't just any retired lawyer. She was sharp, strategic, and deeply passionate about environmental justice. Her years of experience in the courtroom gave her an edge, and she approached this case with the same determination she'd shown throughout her career. The first step was gathering evidence. Maria knew that proving Daniel's ownership of the spring was crucial, so she dove headfirst into historical records. She spent hours at the county archives, poring over dusty ledgers, land deeds, and old maps. It was tedious work, but Maria didn't mind. Every detail mattered, and she was determined to leave no stone unturned. Meanwhile, Daniel focused on documenting the damage caused by the illegal piping operation. He took detailed photographs of the trenches dug across his property, the wilting crops struggling without adequate water, and the dry patches where lush grass used to grow. But their efforts didn't stop there. Daniel installed discrete cameras around the spring, capturing footage of HOA members returning to maintain the pipes or make adjustments. These videos became a treasure trove of evidence, showing exactly who was involved and what they were doing. One particularly damning clip showed Karen herself overseeing the installation, barking orders at workers and pointing out where to lay the pipes. It was clear she wasn't just a bystander, she was the mastermind behind the entire operation. As each they built their case, Daniel and Maria realized they couldn't win this battle alone. They needed support from others in the community, people who had also been affected by Karen's schemes. So, they reached out to local farmers, ranchers, and even some residents of Willow Heights who had grown uneasy about Karen's behavior. Slowly but surely, a coalition began to form. At first, it was just a handful of people meeting in Daniel's barn to share stories and strategize. But as word spread, more joined in, united by a common goal: exposing Karen's greed and protecting their shared resources. Maria played a key role in organizing these meetings, using her calm demeanor and persuasive speech to rally the group. She reminded everyone that this wasn't just about Daniel. It was about setting a precedent for how disputes over natural resources should be handled. "If we let her get away with this," she said during one meeting, "what's stopping her or someone else from doing the same thing again?" This is about standing up for what's right, not just for us, but for future generations. One of the most vocal supporters was Tom Reynolds, a grizzled cattle rancher whose herd had suffered due to the drought. Tom had always admired Daniel from afar, respecting the way he cared for his land. When he heard about Karen's actions, he was furious. "That woman thinks she can walk all over anyone who gets in her way," Tom growled during one barn meeting. "Well, I say enough is enough. We're not going to let her bully us into submission." Another ally was Lucy Chen, a young environmental activist who ran a small nonprofit focused on sustainable farming practices. Lucy brought fresh energy to the group, helping them craft social media posts and press releases to raise awareness about the situation. She believed that shining a spotlight on Karen's actions could galvanize public opinion and put pressure on local authorities to act. "People need to see what's really going on here," Lucy said passionately. "Once they understand how far she's willing to go, they'll demand accountability." With the coalition growing stronger, Daniel felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. For so long he had carried the weight of this fight on his shoulders, feeling isolated and powerless. But now, surrounded by friends and neighbors who believed in his cause, he began to feel like victory might actually be within reach. While the coalition worked tirelessly behind the scenes, Karen remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. Confident in her perceived superiority, she continued flaunting her newfound success. She hosted extravagant gatherings at her home, inviting influential figures from neighboring towns to marvel at the abundance of water flowing into Willow Heights. During these events, she bragged about how she had single-handedly solved the water crisis, painting herself as a hero. Few attendees questioned where the water came from or whether it was obtained legally. They were too busy enjoying the lavish spreads and sparkling fountains. Karen's arrogance extended beyond her social circle. She began giving interviews to local newspapers and radio stations, spinning tales of how she had saved her community from ruin. In one particularly audacious article, she claimed that Daniel Harper had resisted sharing the spring because he wanted to profit off it himself, a blatant lie designed to turn public opinion against him. Unfortunately for her, her web of deceit was starting to unravel. Back at the coalition's makeshift headquarters, Daniel's barn, the team reviewed their findings and planned their next move. Maria suggested filing a formal complaint with the State Environmental Agency, accusing Karen and the HOA of violating water usage laws. At the same time, Lucy launched a social media campaign titled Save Willow Creek Spring, sharing photos, videos, and testimonials from those impacted by the water diversion. The hashtag quickly gained traction, drawing attention from journalists and activists outside Willow Creek. Public pressure began mounting as more people learned about Karen's unethical tactics. Environmental groups condemned her exploitation of natural resources, while legal experts weighed in on the illegality of her actions. Even some HOA members started questioning her leadership, admitting they hadn't known the full extent of her manipulations. Cracks appeared in her carefully constructed facade, and for the first time, Karen found herself on the defensive. Despite the mounting scrutiny, Karen refused to back down. Instead, she doubled down on her narrative, insisting that everything she did was for the greater good. But her words rang hollow, especially when confronted with concrete evidence of her wrongdoing. As Daniel and Maria prepared to present their case in court, they knew the battle was far from over. But they also knew they had something Karen lacked: integrity, unity, and the truth on their side. For Daniel, the journey had transformed him in ways he never expected. Once a man content to live quietly and tend to his farm, he had become a symbol of resistance against greed and entitlement. With each passing day, he grew more determined to protect not only his land but also the principles it represented. And though the road ahead promised challenges, he faced them with courage, knowing he wasn't fighting alone. The tension in Willow Creek reached a boiling point one crisp autumn morning, when Karen Whitmore decided to escalate her campaign against Daniel Harper. Fed up with his refusal to back down, she gathered a group of HOA members and marched onto his property, determined to physically block him from accessing his crops and equipment. Armed with signs that read "Share the Water" and "Fairness for All," they positioned themselves at key points around the farm, creating a human barricade. It was a bold move, designed to intimidate Daniel into submission, or at least make him look unreasonable in the eyes of onlookers. Daniel arrived at the scene just as the standoff began. He had been expecting trouble after weeks of escalating hostility, but nothing could have prepared him for what he saw. Dozens of people stood between him and his livelihood, their faces stern and unyielding. At the center of it all was Karen, directing the operation with military precision. She held a megaphone in one hand and a clipboard in the other, shouting orders while maintaining an air of righteous indignation. "This is ridiculous," Daniel muttered under his breath as he approached the group. His voice carried calm authority, despite the chaos unfolding before him. "Karen, you're trespassing again. You need to leave my property now." Karen smirked, lowering the megaphone for a moment. "Oh, Daniel, we're not leaving until you agree to share the spring fairly. Your selfishness is hurting everyone." Her tone dripped with sarcasm, masking the greed driving her actions. Daniel shook his head, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "I've already told you I'm not hoarding anything. This spring has been part of my family's land for over 100 years. If anyone's being unfair, it's you." The argument escalated quickly, drawing the attention of nearby neighbors who came out to see what the commotion was about. Some filmed the confrontation on their phones, capturing every heated exchange. One video in particular went viral almost instantly. In it, Karen could be seen yelling at Daniel while gesturing wildly, her face flushed with anger. Behind her, The makeshift blockade of HOA members looked more like a mob than a peaceful protest. The footage struck a chord with viewers across the country, sparking outrage and sympathy for Daniel's plight. Within hours, news outlets picked up the story, dubbing it HOA Karen versus Farmer Dan. Reporters flocked to Willow Creek, eager to cover the dramatic showdown between a hard-working farmer and a power-hungry HOA leader. Journalists interviewed Daniel, Maria Alvarez, and members of the coalition, painting a vivid picture of the injustice unfolding in their small town. They also spoke to residents of Willow Heights, many of whom admitted they hadn't realized the extent of Karen's schemes. Some expressed regret for blindly supporting her, while others defended her actions, claiming she was only trying to help the community. Public opinion began to shift dramatically. Social media played a pivotal role, amplifying the voices of those standing with Daniel. Hashtags like Justice for Daniel and Tear Stop HOA Bullying trended nationwide, drawing support from farmers, activists, and ordinary citizens alike. Environmental organizations joined the chorus, condemning Karen's exploitation of natural resources and calling for stricter regulations to prevent similar incidents in the future. Karen, however, remained unfazed by the growing backlash, at least outwardly. Privately, she seethed with frustration as her carefully crafted image crumbled under scrutiny. What had started as a calculated effort to control the water supply had spiraled into a public relations nightmare. Every accusation leveled against her seemed to gain traction, fueled by the damning evidence Daniel and Maria had gathered. Videos of her overseeing the illegal piping operation circulated widely, exposing her true motivations. Even her own allies within the HOA began distancing themselves, fearful of being associated with her increasingly toxic reputation. Despite the mounting pressure, Karen refused to admit defeat. Instead, she doubled down on her narrative, insisting that she was protecting her community from dehydration. During interviews, she portrayed herself as a victim of misinformation, claiming that Daniel and his supporters were twisting the facts to paint her as a villain. "This isn't about me," she said during one particularly defensive TV appearance. "It's about ensuring that everyone has access to clean water. If that makes me unpopular, so be it." Her words fell flat, especially when juxtaposed with the overwhelming evidence against her. Documents proving Daniel's ownership of the spring surfaced online, along with testimonials from historians and legal experts confirming its legitimacy. Meanwhile, the coalition continued sharing stories of how Karen's actions had impacted local farmers and residents. These accounts painted a stark contrast between Daniel's integrity and Karen's greed, further swaying public opinion in his favor. As the controversy dominated headlines, life in Willow Creek became surreal. Strangers drove through the town, snapping photos of Daniel's farm and the HOA neighborhood. Delivery trucks brought care packages filled with supplies and messages of encouragement for Daniel, sent by supporters from across the country. Local businesses displayed signs reading, "We stand with Farmer Dan," turning the once quiet town into a symbol of resistance against corporate greed and entitlement. Even some members of Willow Heights turned against Karen, unable to reconcile her behavior with their values. A few brave souls attended coalition meetings, apologizing for their earlier silence and offering to testify against her in court. Their defection dealt a significant blow to Karen's authority, weakening her grip on the HOA board. For the first time, cracks appeared in her carefully constructed empire, threatening to bring it crashing down. Through it all, Daniel remained steadfast, though the weight of the situation occasionally overwhelmed him. There were moments when he questioned whether the fight was worth it, whether preserving his farm was worth the toll it took on his mental and emotional well-being. But then he'd think about his grandparents, who had worked tirelessly to build the farm from scratch, and his parents, who had taught him the value of perseverance. Giving up wasn't an option, not when so much was at stake. Maria provided unwavering support during these challenging times, reminding Daniel of the importance of staying focused. "You're not just fighting for yourself," she often said. "You're fighting for everyone who believes in fairness and justice. Don't lose sight of that." Her words resonated deeply, giving Daniel the strength to keep going. Together, they prepared for the upcoming trial, knowing it would be a defining moment in their battle against Karen. With mountains of evidence, a growing coalition, and public opinion firmly on their side, they felt cautiously optimistic about their chances. Still, they understood that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Karen was desperate, and desperation made people unpredictable. As the days passed, the atmosphere in Willow Creek grew tense yet hopeful. Conversations buzzed with speculation about the trial's outcome, and anticipation hung thick in the air. For Daniel, the stakes had never been higher, but neither had the potential for redemption. After months of struggle, sacrifice, and resilience, he was ready to face whatever came next. Whether triumph or defeat awaited him, one thing was certain. He had already inspired countless others to stand up for what was right, and that in itself was a victory worth celebrating.